Hey there! Welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I was about 9 years old when it happened, and even now, decades later, the memory still sits somewhere deep in my chest. It's one of those moments that never really fades, no matter how much time passes. I can still picture it clearly, still feel the fear in my body as if it happened last night instead of years ago. It was winter in northern Minnesota, the kind of winter that feels endless when you're a kid. Snow piled high outside, covering everything in thick, white silence. The days were short, the nights long and heavy, and darkness always seemed to come too early. Our house sat near the woods, surrounded by tall trees that creaked and groaned when the wind moved through them. At night, the world outside felt vast and empty, like it could swallow sound and light without effort. That day had been completely normal. My family had gone to church together, something we did almost every Sunday. We were gone for hours, and when we came back, the house felt just like it always did. Nothing seemed out of place. No doors open, no broken windows, no signs that anything was wrong. As far as anyone could tell, it was just another quiet winter day. That night, everyone settled in like usual. My parents were downstairs, my siblings were in their rooms, and I went to bed without any sense that something was about to change the way I felt about nighttime forever. I was the youngest kid in the house, and my bedroom felt big and quiet once the lights were off. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing, and every small creak sounds louder than it should. My room had a large closet with sliding doors, or one of those older style closets that stretched across part of the wall. The doors didn't lock. They just slid back and forth on a track, and sometimes they didn't close perfectly straight. As a kid, I never really thought about it. Closets were just closets, a place for clothes, shoes, and random junk. I don't know exactly what woke me up. It wasn't a noise that I remember clearly. It was more like that sudden feeling you get when something is wrong, when your body knows before your mind does. My eyes opened, and at first I was confused. The room was dark, lit only faintly by moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. Then I saw him. There was a man standing inside my closet. He wasn't hiding behind clothes or crouched down. He was just there, watching me. His face was partially in shadow, but I could tell he was looking directly at me. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. For a second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I remember thinking that maybe I was still dreaming, that maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the longer I looked, the more real he became. He was solid, he was real, and he was in my room. The fear hit me all at once, like ice water poured straight into my chest. I couldn't breathe. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Every part of my body wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring at him, trying to understand how a stranger could be standing in my closet. Then I screamed. It wasn't a controlled scream or a call for help. It was pure panic, the kind of scream that comes from somewhere deep and instinctive, the kind you don't even realize you're making until it's already tearing out of your throat. I screamed as loud as I could because I didn't know what else to do. Everything happened fast after that. The man moved immediately. As soon as I screamed, he turned and ran. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to come toward me. He just bolted. I heard the sliding glass door open somewhere nearby, the sound sharp and loud in the quiet house. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and fast, followed by the sound of someone running down the porch stairs. And then he was gone. My family came running upstairs seconds later. My parents, my siblings, all of them rushed into my room at once, asking what happened, asking why I was screaming. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. All I could do was point at the closet and try to explain that there had been a man there, a man in my closet watching me. They searched the house immediately, every room, every corner. The sliding glass door was open, just like I had heard. Cold winter air poured inside. Outside, the porch stairs led straight down toward the woods. The snow showed footprints heading away from the house, disappearing into the trees. The police were called, and they came out to take a report. They asked questions I didn't fully understand at the time. What did he look like? How tall was he? What was he wearing? I tried to answer, but everything felt blurry. I had only seen him for a few seconds, and fear had swallowed most of the details. Later, the adults talked quietly among themselves. I overheard pieces of it. They thought he might have been someone with nowhere to go, maybe a homeless man, maybe someone who had broken into the house earlier in the day while we were gone at church, just looking for a warm place to stay. Northern Minnesota winters are brutal. People can die from exposure if they don't find shelter. That explanation made sense to them. To me, it didn't matter. All I knew was that a stranger had been in my room while I slept. He had stood in my closet and watched me. That knowledge settled into my bones and never really left. After that night, I was never comfortable in the dark again. Bedtime became something I dreaded. I checked my closet every night before sleeping, sometimes multiple times. I asked my parents to leave the door open or to let me sleep with a light on. I listened for every sound, every creak, to every shift of the house settling in the cold. Even now, as an adult, nighttime still makes me uneasy. I don't like sleeping in complete darkness. I don't like closed closets. I don't like the feeling of not being able to see what's around me. I'm always aware of shadows, always listening, always alert in ways I wish I didn't have to be. That experience didn't just scare me in the moment. It changed how my mind reacts to the world when the lights go out. It taught me, far too early, that danger can exist quietly, that someone can be close without making a sound, that safety can disappear when you least expect it. I understand, logically, that what happened probably had a simple explanation. A desperate person. A wrong place at the wrong time. Someone who panicked when they were discovered and ran. But logic doesn't erase fear, and it doesn't undo what a 9-year-old feels when they wake up and realize they are not alone. I've never been good at nighttime since then. That experience didn't help at all. My boyfriend and I had gotten into a small argument that evening. It wasn't anything explosive or dramatic, just one of those tired, irritated disagreements that come from spending a lot of time together. We both needed space more than anything else. After a few sharp words, he grabbed his keys and left the house to cool off, which honestly wasn't unusual for us. Our fights never last very long, and he usually comes back once we've both had time to breathe. After he left, I went into the bedroom and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry anymore, just emotionally drained. The house felt quiet in that heavy way it does after someone storms out. I could still hear the faint hum of the outside world through the open window next to the bed. I had cracked it open about 1.5 inches earlier to let some fresh air in because the room felt stuffy. As I lay there, I started thinking about how my boyfriend likes to get my attention when he comes back after an argument. He's always been a bit playful, sometimes annoying in a way that's meant to break the tension. He'll knock on the window, tap on the wall, or make some kind of dramatic entrance just to get a reaction out of me. So when I heard a sound outside, my mind immediately went to him. The noise was very specific. I heard footsteps crunching on the rocks outside my window. We have a rock bed that runs around the perimeter of the house, filled with small stones that make a very distinct sound when someone walks on them. It's not a sound you confuse with anything else. You know immediately that someone is there. Then I heard something else. It sounded like someone scooping up a pile of rocks with both hands. I could hear the stones being lifted, shifting against each other, followed by the slow, deliberate sound of them pouring back onto the ground. Not dumped all at once, but slowly, like whoever was doing it wanted to be heard. I smiled to myself. In that moment I was almost amused. I thought, of course it's him. It felt exactly like something he would do to let me know he was back without just walking in like a normal person. I imagined him standing outside the window, messing with the rocks, probably waiting for me to notice. The tension from the argument softened instantly. I got off the bed, feeling a little relieved, and decided I'd meet him outside before he could keep playing whatever game he had in mind. I didn't even feel annoyed. I actually felt a little fond, thinking about how predictable he was when it came to making peace. I walked through the house toward the back door, already preparing myself to roll my eyes and tell him to come inside. That's when I saw the headlights. Through the window, I watched a car pulling into the driveway. I stopped walking instantly. My brain stalled for a second, like it couldn't process what I was seeing. The car slowed, turned, and parked exactly the way my boyfriend always parked. My stomach dropped. A second later, the door opened, and my boyfriend stepped out. He was just arriving. That was the moment everything shifted from mildly playful to deeply wrong. I stood there frozen, staring at him as he walked toward the house, completely unaware of what had just happened outside the bedroom window. And my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My thoughts raced, trying desperately to make the situation make sense. If he was just pulling into the driveway now, then who had been outside my window only moments earlier? The footsteps on the rocks weren't imagined. I knew that sound too well. The slow pouring of stones back onto the ground wasn't random noise or wind. It was deliberate, intentional. Someone had been standing right outside my window, close enough for me to hear every movement clearly, and it wasn't him. A wave of fear hit me all at once, sharp and sudden. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't just minutes earlier. That open window, which had felt harmless and refreshing before, now felt like a mistake. I thought about how close the sound had been, how easily someone could have reached inside if they wanted to. Or when my boyfriend came inside, I don't even remember what I said first. I know my voice was shaky. I know my face must have looked pale, because he immediately asked me what was wrong. I told him everything in a rush, stumbling over my words, explaining what I heard, what I thought, and what I realized when I saw his headlights. He checked outside right away. He looked around the house, the rock bed, the yard. There was no one there, no movement, no explanation. Just the quiet night and the faint crunch of rocks under his own footsteps as he walked around. That somehow made it worse. If there had been someone there, at least I would have had proof that I wasn't imagining things. But the absence of anything tangible left my mind spiraling. Whoever it was had already left, silently, without making a sound I could hear from inside. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the exact sound of the rocks being lifted, the slow pour back onto the ground. The fact that it didn't sound rushed or accidental, it felt like whoever it was wanted to be noticed, or at least didn't care if they were. That night, I couldn't relax. Every sound made me tense. I kept glancing toward the window, imagining someone standing there again, just out of sight. The argument with my boyfriend felt insignificant compared to the realization that a stranger had been that close to me without my knowledge. Even after we locked everything up and went to bed, sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept circling back to one unsettling thought. If I hadn't gone to meet him at the back door, if I hadn't seen those headlights when I did, I might still believe it was him outside my window. And that thought scared me more than anything else. Because whoever it was had been close enough to listen, close enough to touch the ground beneath my window, close enough to make themselves known. And they disappeared just as quietly as they came, leaving behind nothing but the sound of rocks and the feeling that safety can vanish in an instant. Even now, thinking about it, my chest tightens. It wasn't a dramatic break-in or a confrontation. No faces, no voices, no clear threat. Just a brief moment where reality shifted and reminded me how vulnerable you can be in your own home, how easily your brain can mistake danger for something familiar. That night still freaks me out badly, and every time I hear rocks crunch outside a window, my body reacts before my mind can catch up. That night, I was completely alone in the house. Everyone else was gone, and it was already very late. The kind of late where the world feels quieter than usual, where every small sound feels louder because there's nothing else to cover it up. I remember lying in bed trying to fall asleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the house settling. Eventually I drifted off, exhausted but restless. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. That half-asleep feeling lingered, where your brain is still foggy and you're not sure what's real yet. Then I heard it, a loud scratching sound. It was sharp and rough, like nails or claws dragging against glass or metal. It was coming from the spare bedroom window down the hall. The sound was deliberate, slow, persistent. My entire body went cold. I sat up in bed, frozen, barely breathing. My heart started racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, I convinced myself it had to be something normal. Maybe a tree branch, maybe an animal, maybe the wind had picked up. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. Then, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. I was just starting to convince myself that whatever it was had gone away when I heard the sound again. This time, it was closer. It wasn't coming from the spare bedroom anymore. The scratching was now near the bathroom window. I felt tears immediately fill my eyes. Panic hit me all at once, heavy and overwhelming. My body reacted before my mind could even process what was happening. My hands were shaking. My stomach felt tight and sick. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. I just listened, praying it would stop. But it didn't. After a few more seconds, the sound moved again. This time, it was right outside my bedroom window. That was when I truly lost it. I was terrified. I pressed myself deeper into my bed, pulling the blankets up, even though I knew they wouldn't protect me from anything. My breathing turned shallow, and tears started sliding down my face. I was fully awake now, completely aware, and completely alone. What made it so much worse was the realization that hit me next. Those windows were on the second floor. There was no easy way for anyone or anything to reach them. No low roof, no tree branches close enough, no ladder that I knew of. Or whatever was scratching at the windows was high off the ground, right outside my room, moving from window to window like it knew exactly where it was going. I remember thinking over and over, this can't be happening. This doesn't make sense. My mind desperately searched for logic, for some explanation that would calm me down, but nothing fit. Every possibility felt worse than the last. Eventually, the scratching stopped. Not gradually, not fading away. It just stopped, suddenly and completely, like someone had decided they were done. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed awake, staring at the door, listening for any other sound. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept expecting the scratching to start again, right outside the glass, but it never did. When the sun finally started to rise, I felt more exhausted than I had ever felt in my life. Morning light filled the house, and with it came a strange sense of disbelief. In the daylight, everything looked normal again, calm, safe. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. That illusion disappeared the moment I checked the windows. I went into my bedroom first and looked outside. My stomach dropped. The window screen was completely torn apart, shredded like something had grabbed it and ripped it open. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding, my skin crawling. Then I checked the spare bedroom. The screen there was torn too. The bathroom window was the same. Every single window where I had heard the scratching had been damaged. There was no denying it anymore. Whatever had been outside wasn't in my imagination. It was real, and it had left proof behind. I told my parents as soon as they got home. They didn't react calmly. They didn't try to rationalize it. Instead, they completely freaked me out. After hearing the story and seeing the damage, they exchanged looks and said, dead serious, that it must have been a demon. That was not what I needed to hear. If I had been scared before, that pushed it to a whole new level. My mind immediately filled with horrifying images and worst-case scenarios. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Part of me wanted logic. Another part of me was already too deep in fear to dismiss anything. Trying to cope the only way I knew how, I told them to get the salt. If we were dealing with something supernatural, then fine. We were going to protect ourselves. I joked about it later, saying it was a shame we didn't have the Winchester brothers' phone number, because honestly, that felt like the kind of situation where you call in professionals. Even now, thinking back on it still makes my skin crawl. The idea that something was outside my second-story windows, moving closer and closer, watching or listening, is something I'll never forget. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. All I know is that it was real enough to leave marks behind and scary enough to stay with me long after that night was over. When I was young, there was a day that started like any other quiet afternoon and ended up becoming one of the most unsettling memories of my childhood. At the time, I didn't realize how close I had been to real danger. Looking back now, the whole situation feels heavier, like I was standing right next to something terrible and didn't even understand it. My mom and my grandma had gone to church that day. It wasn't unusual for them to leave me home alone for a little while. I was old enough to take care of myself, and our neighborhood felt safe. The house itself felt safe too. It was familiar, warm, and filled with the everyday sounds I grew up with. When they left, I didn't feel scared or lonely. I was happy to have the house to myself. I was in my bedroom playing The Sims on my computer. I had my headphones on, listening to music loud enough to block out almost everything else. That was my little world back then. Hours could pass without me noticing. I was focused on building houses, managing my characters, and getting lost in that simple digital life. The afternoon light was coming in through my window and everything felt calm and normal. At some point, I faintly noticed my dogs barking. They barked loudly, but they barked at things all the time. If a cat passed by outside, they barked. If someone walked down the street, they barked. If a leaf moved the wrong way, they barked. It was just part of the background noise of the house. I didn't take off my headphones. I didn't even pause my game. I just assumed they were reacting to something small and harmless. The barking continued longer than usual, but I brushed it off. I was young and distracted. Nothing in my mind connected their noise to danger. I kept playing, clicking, and humming along to the music. After a while, I started to feel thirsty. My mouth was dry, and I realized I hadn't had water in a while. I paused the game, pulled off my headphones, and stood up. The sudden quiet felt strange after the music, but even then, I didn't feel worried. The dogs were still barking, sharp and frantic, echoing through the house. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house felt different without my music filling my ears. Every sound seemed clearer. The barking felt closer, more urgent. When I stepped into the kitchen, I went straight to the sink and grabbed a glass. As I was filling it with water, I glanced out the window without really thinking. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved past the window incredibly fast. It wasn't a slow, casual movement. It was quick and sudden, like something had sprinted past. Almost immediately after, there was a loud noise outside. It sounded like something hitting metal or glass. The dogs exploded into even louder barking, wild and panicked. I froze for a second, my hand still holding the glass under the tap. My heart jumped, but my brain rushed to explain it away. I told myself it was probably a rat, or maybe one of the stray animals that sometimes wandered behind the house. We had a big empty lot behind our backyard, and animals occasionally came from there. That explanation felt easier than imagining anything worse. I turned off the water, drank quickly, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. The barking continued, but I forced myself to believe everything was fine. I didn't want to scare myself. I was alone, and the last thing I wanted was to start imagining things. So I went back to my bedroom. I put my headphones back on and tried to sink into my game again, but I couldn't fully relax. The image of that shadow replayed in my mind. It had been too big to be a rat, but I kept insisting to myself that I must have misjudged it. My music felt louder now, almost aggressive in my ears. I turned it up instead of down, trying to drown out the lingering barking and the uncomfortable thoughts in my head. Not long after, I heard the front door open. Even through my headphones, I recognized the sound of my mom and grandma coming back. Relief washed over me instantly. I took off the headphones and ran to the kitchen to greet them, ready to tell them how noisy the dogs had been. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, I knew something was wrong. They weren't talking in their usual calm voices. They sounded tense and shocked. My mom was standing near the back door, staring at it. My grandma had her hand over her mouth. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. I asked what happened, and my mom turned to me with wide eyes. She told me someone had tried to break into the house while I was alone. For a second, I didn't understand her words. They didn't fit into my reality. Break into our house? That only happened in movies or on the news, not in our quiet neighborhood. But then I looked closer. The back door was damaged. The lock looked twisted and almost broken. The protective metal part over the glass had been forced, bent out of shape. There were scratches and marks that hadn't been there before. It looked like someone had tried hard to get inside. My stomach dropped. We stepped outside to the backyard, and more details came into focus. The stair we kept outside had been moved close to the big wall at the back. It had not been there before. Someone had used it to climb over. That huge wall had always made me feel safe. I thought it protected us from the empty lot behind it. I never imagined someone would go through the effort to cross it. Then we noticed the smell. A strong chemical smell hung in the air near where the dogs stayed. My grandma pointed to the ground. There was bleach spilled there. Someone had poured bleach close to the dogs. The realization hit us all at once. They had tried to poison them. My chest tightened. I looked at my dogs. Still barking and agitated, but alive. They hadn't drunk it. Somehow, they had avoided it. The idea that someone had tried to hurt them just to get into our home made me feel sick. That shadow I saw wasn't a rat. It was a person. A real person, standing right outside while I casually drank water, thinking everything was normal. I felt cold from head to toe. As the days passed, we learned more. The person who tried to break in was a neighbor. Not a friendly neighbor we knew, but someone dangerous. We heard stories from others nearby. He had threatened people. He had broken into another house. He was involved in criminal activity and violent behavior. The more we learned, the more shaken I felt. I kept replaying that afternoon in my head, the barking, the shadow, the noise, the way I dismissed it so easily. If the door had opened, if he had gotten inside. I don't like finishing that thought even now. Fortunately, he was eventually arrested and sent to jail. After that, we never heard from him again. Life slowly returned to normal on the surface. The house felt safe again, but something inside me had changed. I had learned how thin the line between normal and dangerous could be. For a long time after, I couldn't hear my dogs bark without my heart jumping. Every shadow outside a window caught my attention. I started listening more carefully to the sounds around me. I never again assumed that strange noises were nothing. The biggest lesson stayed with me. Animals sense things we ignore. My dogs knew something was wrong long before I did. They tried to warn me in the only way they could. I had been too distracted by my game and my music to understand. I also learned how easily we convince ourselves that everything is fine because the truth feels too scary to accept. It's comforting to say it's just a rat instead of someone might be outside, but sometimes that comfort blinds us. Even now, years later, I can still picture that shadow streaking past the window. I can still smell the bleach in the air and see the damaged lock. It's one of those memories that never fully fades. It reminds me to stay aware, to trust warning signs, and to never ignore the feeling that something is off. And I never play music so loud that I can't hear what's happening around me anymore. This will probably get buried, but this is something that has stayed with me for most of my life, partly because it terrified me at the time, and partly because my family still brings it up whenever they get the chance. I was about 8 years old when it happened, old enough to feel a little grown up, but still young enough to be scared of just about everything. One evening, my parents decided to step out for a short while. They were taking my younger sister with them, and they made it very clear that they wouldn't be gone long. It wasn't one of those nights where I'd be alone for hours. It was supposed to be quick. I remember them telling me to lock the door, not open it for anyone, and just stay downstairs until they came back. At that age, being left alone felt like a big deal. I was proud of myself for being trusted, even though a small part of me was nervous. To keep myself busy, I did what any kid my age would do. I turned on the TV, grabbed a controller, and started playing video games in the living room. The lights were on, the house felt familiar, and for the first few minutes, everything was completely normal. The house was quiet in that way houses get quiet when parents leave. No talking, no footsteps, just the soft electronic sounds coming from the TV. I was focused on the game, sitting on the floor, not thinking about much else. I remember feeling safe enough, even comfortable, like I was in my own little world. Then I heard it. At first it was faint, almost like I imagined it. A dull thump from upstairs. I paused the game and listened, holding my breath. The house creaked sometimes, and I tried to convince myself it was just that. But then it happened again. Another thump, louder this time, followed by a dragging sound like something heavy was being pushed across the floor. My stomach dropped instantly. I sat there frozen, listening as carefully as I could. The noises didn't stop. They moved. One moment it sounded like it was above one room, and then it shifted to another. Thump after thump, uneven and loud, echoing through the ceiling. To my 8-year-old brain, there was only one explanation. Someone was upstairs. I felt fear rush through my body in a way I'd never felt before. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every scary thought I'd ever had came flooding in at once. I imagined robbers breaking into the house, walking around upstairs, looking for things to steal. I imagined them coming down the stairs and finding me sitting there alone. I didn't scream. I didn't run right away. I just sat there, terrified, listening to the sounds and trying to decide what to do. The minutes felt like hours. The thumping continued, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always there. It wasn't random anymore. It sounded deliberate. Eventually, fear pushed me into action. We still had a corded phone back then, attached to the wall. I grabbed it as quietly as I could and pulled the cord toward the sofa. My hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to dial. I remember crouching down behind the couch, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. When my parents answered, I could barely speak. My voice came out in a whisper, thin and panicked. I told them I could hear someone upstairs. I said I thought there were robbers in the house. I tried to explain the thumping sounds, but I was so scared that my words kept stumbling over each other. They tried to calm me down. They told me everything was going to be okay and that they were already on their way back home. They spoke gently, reassuring me, but it didn't stop the fear. Even while they were talking, I could still hear the noises above me. After I hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. I stayed behind the sofa, listening, my eyes fixed on the stairs as if I expected someone to appear at any second. The thumping didn't stop. If anything, it felt closer. I imagined footsteps moving toward the top of the stairs, imagined shadows shifting in the hallway. At some point, something inside me snapped. Sitting there waiting felt worse than doing something, anything. I decided I couldn't stay in the house anymore. As quietly as I could, I crawled out from behind the sofa and moved toward a nearby window. Every sound made me flinch. The TV was still on, forgotten, casting flickering light across the room. I opened the window slowly, trying not to make any noise, and climbed out. I don't remember feeling the cold air at first. I remember the drop. I landed in the bushes along our driveway, scraping myself a little, but I didn't care. I was running on pure adrenaline. I stumbled up the driveway, still wearing only my Rugrats boxers, and stood there in the dark, crying and shaking. I must have looked ridiculous, but at that moment, all I cared about was being outside and away from whatever was in the house. When my parents pulled into the driveway, they found me standing there at the top, barefoot, sobbing, barely able to explain what had happened. My mum rushed to me immediately, wrapping her arms around me, while my dad tried to calm me down and figure out what was going on. After a few moments, my dad went inside to check the house. I stayed outside with my mum and sister, clinging to her, still convinced that something terrible was about to happen. Every second felt tense. I kept staring at the front door, expecting my dad to come running back out. Eventually, he did come back out, but not in the way I expected. He was trying not to laugh. Inside the house, he had found the source of the terrifying noises. Earlier that day, my sister had left her pet hamster inside its plastic exercise ball. Somehow, it had been left upstairs. The hamster had been happily rolling around, bumping into walls, doors, and furniture, and creating the loud, thumping sounds that had convinced me there were intruders in the house. What I thought were robbers moving from room to room was just a tiny hamster running into things. At the time, I didn't find it funny at all. I was embarrassed, shaken, and still trying to calm down from the fear. But as the years passed, it became one of those stories my family never let go of. Even now, I still haven't lived it down. I can't honestly say this was the single scariest thing that has ever happened to me, but it is one of the most unsettling experiences I've had in recent years. What made it worse is that it wasn't dramatic in the usual way. No loud crash, no clear threat, no face at the window. Just a slow, creeping realization that something was very wrong, and that whatever it was, every animal in my house knew it before I did. I live in a pretty isolated area. My house sits in the middle of open land, with vast cornfields stretching out on 3 sides of the property. Once the crops grow tall, they form thick walls of green that block sight and sound. At night especially, it feels like the world just ends a few feet beyond the windows. There are no streetlights, no nearby neighbors, no traffic noise. When it gets quiet out here, it gets truly quiet. At the time, we had 10 cats and 1 dog living in the house. The cats are indoor cats, spoiled beyond belief. Over the years, we've installed shelves and platforms all over the walls so they can climb, lounge, sleep, and watch the world from above like tiny, judgmental gods. Every shelf is worn smooth from years of paws and naps. They spend most of their time either on those shelves or piled up together on the couch with me. That night was calm and ordinary. It was late, well past midnight, one of those nights where sleep feels far away, but the house feels peaceful. All the windows were open to let in a cool breeze, and the air smelled faintly of dirt and crops. The curtains shifted slightly with the wind, and the house made the usual quiet noises of settling wood and distant creaks. I was sitting on the couch, half watching TV, half scrolling on my phone. The dog was asleep nearby, stretched out and snoring softly. Every single cat was asleep too. Some were draped over the shelves above me, some curled into tight balls, some stretched long and lazy on the couch. The house felt safe, comfortable, completely normal. Then, without warning, everything changed. Every single cat woke up at the exact same moment, not one by one, not gradually, all at once. 10 cats snapped awake from a dead sleep like someone had flipped a switch. Their heads all turned in the same direction, moving in perfect unison, their eyes locked onto the exact same window, the one directly behind my head. I didn't even move at first. I just froze, slowly becoming aware that something was very wrong. Cats don't do that. They don't synchronize like that unless something truly grabs their attention. And these weren't curious looks. This wasn't playful interest or excitement. This was fear. One of the cats let out a low growl, then another. Within seconds, the room filled with deep, vibrating growls that I had almost never heard from them before. Their bodies stiffened, fur puffed up along spines and tails, ears flattened. Hissing followed, sharp and aggressive, echoing softly in the quiet house. They began to move, slowly and carefully, never taking their eyes off that window. One by one, they slipped down from the shelves and the couch, hugging the walls, moving low to the ground. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, like they were retreating from a predator. Each cat made their way toward the bedroom, me disappearing down the hallway with stiff legs and wide eyes. None of them ran. They slinked like they were trying not to be seen. That's when the dog woke up. At first, he lifted his head, confused by the sudden tension in the room. Then he followed their gaze. His body stiffened instantly. A deep, furious growl rolled out of his chest, nothing like his normal barking. His hackles rose, fur standing straight up along his back. Then he exploded. He started barking at the same window, loud and violent, throwing his whole body into it. This wasn't his usual bark. This was the kind of bark that says something is wrong, something dangerous, something unfamiliar, the kind of bark that makes your blood run cold because you know he's not reacting to imagination or shadows. And then, just like the cats, he bolted toward the bedroom, barking the entire way, glancing back at the window as if whatever was out there was moving. I finally moved. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. My hands were already shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. I didn't look out the window. I didn't want to. Something deep inside me knew that whatever had my animals reacting like this was not something I wanted to see. I shut off the lights in the living room and then the bedroom, plunging the house into darkness. I didn't want to be visible from outside. I didn't want to be a silhouette framed by light. I retrieved my gun, hands clumsy and slick with sweat, and slammed the magazine into place harder than necessary. I remember muttering under my breath the entire time, barely aware of the words coming out. Oh fuck, oh shit, oh Jesus, oh God. Over and over, like a broken prayer. I moved through the house quickly but carefully, shutting and locking every window I could reach. The breeze disappeared, replaced by heavy, stale air. Every small sound felt amplified. My footsteps sounded too loud. The click of locks felt like gunshots in the silence. The dog never stopped barking. He stood at the bedroom window, muscles tight, teeth bared, barking into the darkness beyond the glass. That window faces the cornfield. When the corn is grown, it forms a solid wall only a few yards away. Someone could step inside it and vanish instantly. You could stand 10 feet away and never be seen. That thought sat like a weight in my stomach. Whatever had been out there, the dog was locked onto one specific spot. He didn't move his gaze. He didn't pace. He barked at the same place, again and again, like he could see something I couldn't. Time stretched in strange ways after that. Minutes felt like hours. My ears strained for footsteps, for rustling, for any sound that would confirm what my animals already knew. The house felt too small, too exposed, surrounded by darkness on all sides. I debated calling the police. My phone was in my hand more than once, but nothing escalated. No knock, no broken glass, no attempt to enter. Just that unrelenting focus from the dog, and the cats hiding silently in the bedroom, eyes wide and unblinking. Eventually, slowly, the dog stopped barking. He didn't relax exactly, but the intensity faded. He stayed alert, watching the window, but no longer losing his mind. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. I didn't sleep much that night. Even now, I don't know what was out there. A person? An animal? Someone passing through the field? Maybe, but I know one thing for sure. When 11 animals wake up from a dead sleep and react with that level of fear and aggression toward the same exact place, something was absolutely there. It might not be the most dramatic story. Nothing technically happened. But the fear was real. The isolation made it worse. And the knowledge that something was close enough to be noticed, close enough to trigger every instinct in the animals that share my home, still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, sometimes the scariest moments are the ones where nothing happens at all, because you're left wondering what almost did. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. I wasn't home that weekend. I was staying with my grandma, just a normal visit, nothing out of the ordinary. It was the kind of weekend I always looked forward to, not because anything special was happening, but because being with her always felt safe. Her house had that comforting, familiar smell of baking and old furniture, the faint scent of lavender from the little sachets she kept in drawers, the kind of place where everything felt in its proper place, where the outside world felt far away, and where you could forget about school, stress, and responsibility for a little while. We had plans for the weekend, a little quiet time together. Maybe we'd watch TV, maybe she'd teach me a new cookie recipe. or we'd sit together in the kitchen while she told stories about when she was my age. Simple things, but they felt special. Or everything felt safe, familiar, and calm. I remember walking around the house that morning, the sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows, and thinking how lucky I was to have these moments. At some point, my grandma had to go to the doctor. It was nothing serious, just a routine checkup, and she reminded me she wouldn't be gone long. I wasn't worried at all. I stayed behind in the house, knowing she would be back soon. In fact, I liked having the house to myself for a little while. I could move around freely, make noise if I wanted, and not worry about bothering anyone. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes with being trusted to be alone for a short time, even when you're 14. About 15 minutes after she left, I decided to go downstairs to lock the door. Grandma had forgotten to lock it, which wasn't unusual. She was getting older, her mind sometimes wandering. I wasn't paying full attention, still half asleep and a little groggy, moving through the quiet house as I went about this small task. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creaks of the wooden floors beneath my feet. And then I noticed something strange. A man had walked in. Just walked in. I froze, mid-step, staring in disbelief. The door had been unlocked. Yes, but no one had been expected. I couldn't even process what I was seeing. He had pushed the door open and stepped inside as casually as if he were invited, as if he belonged there. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. My mind was screaming too, but my body felt frozen, unable to move. The man looked completely at ease, almost like he owned the place. His clothes were rumpled, his hair messy, and his eyes half closed. Then I noticed the smell before I even realized what it was. Alcohol. The sharp, overwhelming stench of someone who had clearly been drinking heavily. My stomach dropped. He was drunk, completely drunk. He stumbled forward a few steps, and before I could even think about reacting, he collapsed flat onto the couch. He didn't stumble, he didn't sit down carefully, he just fell, fully sprawled out, and immediately started snoring. The sound was loud, intrusive, and terrifying. It was as if he had planted himself there deliberately. He didn't care. He wasn't saying anything, just lying there like he had every right to be in my grandma's house. I, on the other hand, was frozen at the top of the stairway, paralyzed by fear. I was 14 years old, and I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. My hands were clammy, my stomach in knots. My mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. What do I do? Do I call the police? Do I try to get him out? Am I supposed to confront a drunk stranger who could be dangerous? The very idea of approaching him seemed impossible. I remember standing there, completely still, every instinct telling me to run, to scream, to hide, but my body refusing to move. The silence of the house felt deafening. I could hear every creak of the floorboards, every distant car outside, every muffled sound from the street. Time seemed to slow down. Each second stretched endlessly, and I was left just staring at him, trying to figure out how to survive this situation. The couch sagged under his weight as he lay there, oblivious, snoring deeply, completely unaware of how terrifying he looked to me. I tried to think rationally. Maybe if I moved quietly to the phone, I could call my grandma or someone else. But I didn't want to risk him waking up, turning around, realizing someone was watching him. My brain was in overdrive, imagining every possible outcome, most of which ended badly. And then, just when it felt like I might collapse from fear, a sound broke through the tension, the sound of my brother's car pulling into the driveway. Relief washed over me in a way I hadn't realized I was capable of feeling. It was like a wave crashing over a storm-tossed sea. I had backup, someone who could handle this. I don't even know how long it took him to get there, but it felt like the world had slowed down while I waited for him. My legs were weak, my knees trembling, and I couldn't breathe properly, but seeing him walk up the driveway, calm and confident, changed everything. My brother didn't panic. He didn't yell or scream. He assessed the situation quickly and decisively. He went inside, and I watched from the stairway as he carefully approached the man. The drunk man probably didn't even know he was in the wrong house, too far gone to realize his mistake. My brother handled it calmly, guiding him out without escalating the situation, probably muttering under his breath, but making sure that he left safely. I stayed at the top of the stairs, still shaking, heart hammering, trying to process what had just happened. The adrenaline lingered, my body tense and alert even after the immediate danger was gone. We locked every door, double-checked the windows, and finally sat together in the living room, shaken but safe. I couldn't believe how close I had come to a potentially dangerous situation. It was surreal, almost like something out of a movie, but terrifyingly real. Even years later, I can still feel that moment, the panic, the disbelief, the feeling of being utterly powerless, the memory of standing there alone in a house that suddenly felt completely unsafe, is something that has never left me. It's the kind of story that makes you appreciate safety, family, and the importance of having someone to rely on. Looking back, I can laugh now, though it was anything but funny at the time. It's the kind of story that stays with you, that you tell over and over. And even when you do, your heart still skips a beat. It taught me a lot about fear, about the fragility of feeling safe, and about how quickly life can throw something completely unexpected at you. It happened on a normal workday morning, the kind of morning where you're half awake and running on routine more than thought. I was getting ready for work, moving through the usual steps without really paying attention. The apartment felt quiet, familiar, safe in the way your own space always does when nothing seems out of place. I turned on the shower, stepped inside, and let the hot water do its thing, while my mind wandered through everything I still needed to do before leaving. While I was in the shower, I heard a few noises. Nothing clear or sharp, just small sounds that didn't immediately register as anything serious. Pipes creak in old buildings. Neighbors move around. People drop things. Doors close. I told myself it was probably just one of those things. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and honestly, I was still half asleep. I chose to ignore it. That decision almost feels ironic now, because the moment I turned off the water and stepped out of the shower, everything changed. As soon as the bathroom door opened, I heard it clearly. Someone was at my apartment door, not knocking politely, not ringing the bell, but actively trying to get in. There was no mistaking the sound. It was the noise of force, of someone pushing, pulling, testing the door like they expected it to give way. My heart dropped instantly. I wrapped a towel around myself and froze for a second, listening. The sound continued. The door wasn't just rattling lightly, it was moving. The lock was holding but barely, and I could tell just from the sound that it wouldn't take much effort for whoever was on the other side to break through. I stepped into the hallway slowly, my whole body tense. I had every nerve on edge. I didn't want to panic, but fear doesn't really ask permission. It just takes over. My hands were shaking already, and I hadn't even seen anyone yet. Trying to sound braver than I felt, I called out, asking who was there. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight and shaky. I waited for an answer, hoping desperately that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. The door moved again. I could see it now. The frame shifted slightly with the pressure. It looked like someone was leaning their weight against it, pushing steadily instead of slamming it. That somehow made it worse. It felt deliberate, like they were testing how strong the lock was, how much effort it would take to get inside. I edged closer and looked through the peephole. There was no one standing in the hallway. That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. The door was still moving, still being pushed, but the hallway looked empty. That's when it hit me that whoever it was might be sitting or lying on the floor, using their body weight against the door instead of standing. The idea of someone pressed up against my door like that, unseen, sent a cold wave of fear through me. I asked again who it was, my voice barely steady now. That's when she answered. The voice that came back was slurred and loud. She sounded old, drunk, angry, and completely unhinged. She started yelling at me immediately, accusing me of being a slut, screaming that I was inside her house with her husband. The words came out in a messy rush, full of rage and confusion, like she truly believed what she was saying. I felt my whole body start to shake. This wasn't someone who had the wrong apartment and was embarrassed. This wasn't a neighbor making a mistake. This was someone who was convinced I was the enemy, who thought I was invading her life, her marriage, her home. There was no reasoning with that kind of mindset, especially not when alcohol was involved. I tried to speak, to explain, to tell her she had the wrong apartment, but she just kept yelling over me. Every time the door shifted, my heart jumped into my throat. I was painfully aware of how little separated me from her. A single, broken lock, a few inches of wood and metal. I backed away and grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called the police. Even while I was on the phone, I could hear her still pushing against the door, still shouting, still completely out of control. I remember trying to whisper to the dispatcher. I'm afraid that saying too much would make things worse, afraid that any noise would provoke her further. The minutes felt endless. I stayed as far from the door as I could, my back against the wall, listening to the sounds on the other side. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. What if the door gave out before the police arrived? What if she got inside? What if she had a weapon? What if she wasn't alone? I've never felt so exposed in my own home. When the police finally arrived, I could hear them immediately. Their voices echoed down the hallway, firm and loud, as they tried to get her to move away from my door. She didn't cooperate, not even a little. There were 4 officers, and even then, it wasn't easy. I could hear the struggle through the door, the sounds of shouting, heavy movement and frustration. And they had to physically remove her from the hallway. And even then, she fought them every step of the way. Only after everything quieted down did I step closer and open the door slightly, staying behind it as much as possible. That's when I saw her being escorted away. She was huge, much bigger than I had imagined, and completely out of control. Even surrounded by officers, she was still yelling, still angry, still convinced of her version of reality. Seeing her in person made my knees feel weak. The officers explained what had happened, reassured me that she was gone, that she wouldn't be coming back. They told me I did the right thing by calling them and by not opening the door. I nodded and thanked them, but my body was still in shock. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I felt cold even though I was wrapped in a towel. After they left, the apartment felt different. The same walls, the same furniture, the same door, but the sense of safety was gone. I kept looking at the lock, at the frame, imagining how close it came to failing. I replayed her voice in my head over and over, the hatred in it, the certainty with which she accused me of something I had nothing to do with. Getting ready for work after that felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of the building sent my heart racing again. Even now, thinking about it, what stays with me the most is how fast everything changed. One moment I was just taking a shower, thinking about my day. The next, I was standing half-dressed in my hallway, terrified that a stranger might break into my home because of something she imagined. It's scary how thin the line is between normal and terrifying, how quickly safety can disappear, and how helpless you can feel when someone else's delusions decide to land at your door. I never heard anything else about her after that day, and honestly, I didn't want to. What mattered was that she was gone, and I was safe. But the fear lingered. It always does after something like that. Your home is supposed to be the place where you feel protected, where you let your guard down. When that illusion breaks, even briefly, it leaves a mark. I was spending a weekend alone at our family vacation cabin in New Mexico, something I had done before and always enjoyed. The cabin sat far from the main road, surrounded by dry hills, scattered trees, and a silence that felt thick enough to touch. In the early mornings, the air there had a sharp bite to it, the kind that makes your lungs sting a little when you breathe in too fast. I had gone out for a jog just after sunrise, running along the dirt path that looped around the property. The ground was still stiff with cold, and each step sent a dull shock up my legs. By the time I came back inside, my face was burning from the wind, but the rest of my body felt numb, like I was wrapped in invisible ice. The cabin itself was old, not charming old in a polished way, but truly old, with creaky floorboards, faded wood paneling, and fixtures that had clearly been there for decades. The bathroom was my favorite part. It had an ancient clawfoot tub made of iron, heavy and solid, the kind that looked like it had survived 100 years without moving an inch. The paint on the outside was chipped in places, showing dark metal underneath, and the porcelain inside had faint cracks that spidered out like thin lines. It always took a while to fill, but soaking in it felt like stepping into another time. That morning, I was desperate to warm up. My fingers were stiff, and my skin still had that strange, numb feeling you get after being in the cold too long. I turned the knobs and listened to the pipes groan awake inside the walls. The tub had separate spouts for hot and cold water, both sticking out from the wall like short metal arms. I turned on the hot water first, letting steam slowly rise and fog the mirror. The bathroom filled with that comforting sound of rushing water echoing off the tile. I stood there for a moment, rubbing my arms, watching the tub fill. When the water started to get too hot, I leaned forward and grabbed the cold water handle to balance it out. The second my hand closed around the metal, a sharp, tingling shot through my skin. At first, it didn't scare me. My brain instantly explained it away. I had just come in from the cold, and the hot water was probably waking up my nerves. It felt strange, but not immediately painful, just a buzzing sensation that spread from my fingers into my wrist. Then I tried to let go. My hand wouldn't move. Instead of releasing the handle, my grip tightened. My fingers clamped down harder, like they belonged to someone else. I could see the tendons in the back of my hand stand out, stretched tight under my skin. A wave of panic rolled through me. I told my hand to open, to drop the handle, but it refused. The tingling turned into a violent vibration that shot up my arm. My muscles locked and my elbow jerked straight. That's when I felt it in my neck. The same tightening, the same unnatural pull, like invisible strings were yanking my body into place. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. In that instant, the truth hit me with a clarity that cut through the panic. I wasn't just feeling a weird reaction to temperature. I was being electrocuted. The thought was cold and precise. Electricity. I'm stuck. Time stretched in a way that's hard to explain. Everything felt both fast and slow. The sound of the water pouring into the tub roared in my ears, louder than it should have been. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I could feel every beat heavy and desperate. I tried to move my other arm, but my body felt like it was turning into stone. My hand kept crushing the metal handle, locked in place by my own muscles. A part of my mind started racing through possibilities. If I stayed like this, I would pass out. If I passed out, I would fall forward. The tub was filling. The water was running. I had a sudden, horrible image of my body slumped into the bath. The current still running through me, the water rising. The cabin was empty. No one was coming. My family wasn't due back for days. The fear wasn't loud or screaming. It was quiet and heavy, a deep certainty that I was on the edge of something final. I don't know what happened in the next few seconds. I wish I could say I made a smart, deliberate choice, that I reasoned my way out of it. The truth is, it felt more like instinct than thought. Every part of me focused on one command: get away. I twisted my body with everything I had, throwing my weight backward. The movement was clumsy and violent. My feet slipped on the tile, and for a split second I thought I was going to fall. Somehow, my hand tore free. The moment I lost contact with the handle, the buzzing stopped. My arm snapped back toward me, and I stumbled away from the tub, crashing into the opposite wall. I slid down onto the cold floor, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. My arm felt like it was on fire, then numb, then aching all at once. I stared at my hand, half expecting to see it burned or blackened. But it looked normal, just red and trembling. When the water was still running, I forced myself to stand and reached out carefully, using a towel to shut off the handles. Even being near them made my stomach twist. When the bathroom finally fell silent, the quiet felt unreal. Steam hung in the air, and the mirror was completely fogged over. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven. I sat on the closed toilet lid and tried to understand what had just happened. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every time I replayed the moment in my head, I felt that same flash of terror. If I hadn't pulled free, if my muscles had locked for a second longer, I didn't want to finish the thought. I called an electrician as soon as my hands were steady enough to dial. Waiting for him to arrive felt endless. I didn't touch the bathroom again. I stayed in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the door like it might open on its own. The cabin suddenly felt different, less like a cozy retreat and more like a trap I had almost died in. When the electrician finally showed up, I walked him through what happened. He listened politely at first, nodding, but I could see a hint of disbelief in his expression. It sounded dramatic even to me, saying it out loud. He carried his tools into the bathroom and started testing the fixtures, touching probes to the metal spout and the water itself. The change in his face was instant. His eyes went wide, and he jerked his hand back like the reading itself had shocked him. He checked again, slower this time, muttering under his breath. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression I'll never forget. It was a mix of shock and something close to awe. He pulled out his phone and called a co-worker right there. I could hear his side of the conversation clearly. He kept repeating how crazy it was, how he had never seen anything like it in a residential cabin. He told the guy I had been bathing in that tub, bathing, with live voltage running through the water and the metal fixtures. After he hung up, he explained what he'd found. The grounding under the cabin had been lost. Somewhere beneath the floor, a critical connection had failed, turning the plumbing into a path for electricity. The iron tub, the spouts, the water itself had become energized. He said the voltage reading was high enough that prolonged contact could have easily killed me. Hearing it confirmed out loud made my stomach drop. It wasn't a near miss in an abstract way. It was specific and technical and real. He told me, very calmly, that if I had stayed stuck to that handle for much longer, my heart could have gone into arrhythmia. I might have lost consciousness. If that happened in a filling tub, the outcome would have been almost certain. I thought about the isolation of the cabin. Days would have passed before anyone came looking. The image of being found like that hit me hard, not just the danger, but the aftermath, the shock it would have caused the people I loved. The electrician kept shaking his head as he worked, still clearly disturbed by the situation. He said he'd seen dangerous wiring before, but rarely something so perfectly set up for a fatal accident. When he finished fixing the grounding issue, the bathroom looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The tub was still chipped and old. The handles still turned with the same squeak. Nothing about it showed how close it had come to killing me. That normal appearance unsettled me more than anything. Danger had been hiding in plain sight, wrapped in something familiar and comforting. Even now, years later, I can still feel a ghost of that vibration in my arm when I think about it. It's not a physical memory so much as a deep instinctive recoil. I'm more careful around old wiring, old fixtures, anything that mixes water and electricity. The experience carved a permanent caution into me. What stays with me the most is how ordinary the moment was before it happened. I was just cold from a jog, looking forward to a warm bath in a quiet cabin. There was no warning sign, no dramatic build-up. 1 second I was adjusting the water temperature, and the next I was locked in a silent fight to pull myself free from a current I couldn't see. I sometimes replay the outcome that didn't happen, the version where I didn't manage to break away. It's a dark path of thought, but it makes the reality sharper. I walked out of that bathroom alive because of a split-second movement that could just as easily have failed. Luck, faulty voltage, sheer stubborn will to survive. I still don't know what tipped the balance in my favor. All I know is that I stepped into that tub expecting comfort and nearly met something final instead. The cabin still stands. The tub still sits in that bathroom, but I've never looked at it the same way again. It's a reminder of how thin the line can be between routine and disaster, and how survival sometimes comes down to a single, desperate motion in the middle of an otherwise quiet morning. There are some moments in life that never really fade, no matter how many years pass. They stay vivid, sharp, and painfully clear, as if they were burned into your memory. For me, one of those moments happened back in 2007, when I was still in middle school and thought my biggest problems were homework and staying up too late playing video games. At the time, I was completely obsessed with Call of Duty, Modern Warfare. Completely. It wasn't just a game to me, it was my whole world. Every spare moment I had was spent online, headset on, talking with friends, running match after match. Nights blended into mornings without me even realizing it. I lived for the adrenaline, the teamwork, the feeling of being connected to people even when I was physically alone in my room. That particular night was a Friday. I remember it clearly because I didn't have to worry about waking up early the next morning. Everyone else in the house had gone to bed hours earlier. My parents were asleep. The house was silent in that deep, heavy way it gets in the middle of the night when nothing is supposed to be happening. It was around 2 a.m, and I was the only one awake. My room was dark except for the glow of the TV screen. The rest of the house was completely black, no lights anywhere. I couldn't hear anything outside of the game because I was wearing my brand new Turtle Beach headset. It was expensive and I was proud of it. It had noise cancelling, which made everything feel even more immersive. The world outside my game practically didn't exist. I was talking to my friends online, laughing, focused, completely unaware of what was happening around me. Then it happened. At first, it barely registered. A deep, heavy sound that somehow pushed through even the noise cancelling. A thud, then another, then another. It didn't sound like something inside the game. It didn't match any explosion or sound effect. It was duller, closer, real. Then came the banging. Loud, violent, unmistakable. Bang, bang, bang. Something scraped against the door. A harsh, scratching sound, like fingernails or something sharp dragging across wood. My heart slammed into my chest. Instinctively, I ripped the headset off my head, convinced for half a second that maybe the TV was glitching, or the sound was coming from the game. It wasn't. The sound was coming from the front door of my house. Someone was beating on it from the outside. Panic washed over me in a way I had never felt before. My stomach dropped. My hands started shaking. The house that had always felt safe suddenly felt fragile, like a thin shell separating me from something dangerous. I threw the headset back on and told my friends what was happening, my voice barely steady. I told them to call the police if I didn't come back online within 5 minutes. Saying those words made everything feel terrifyingly real. I remember thinking how strange it was that just seconds earlier I had felt surrounded by friends, laughter and noise, and now I felt completely alone. They felt so far away. I took the headset off again and moved slowly, carefully, like any sound I made might give me away. I dropped to the floor and army crawled under the front window so whoever was outside wouldn't see me if they looked in. Our every movement felt loud in my own head. My breathing was shallow. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard through the walls. I made my way into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. My hands felt slick with sweat as I wrapped my fingers around the handle. I remember thinking how unreal it all felt, like I was watching myself from the outside. I was a middle school kid holding a kitchen knife in the dark, waiting for something horrible to happen. I positioned myself on the other side of the front door, pressing my back against the wall, staring at the handle as if it might start turning at any second. Then the banging came again. Bang, 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 bang. The scratching returned, louder this time, more frantic. And then, suddenly, there was a voice. A screeching, desperate voice that sent ice through my veins. "Open the door! Open the door! Help me!" My entire body froze. "They're almost here! Open the fucking door! They've taken over!" The words didn't make sense, and somehow that made it even worse. My mind filled in the gaps with the most horrifying possibilities. I imagined someone deranged, someone violent, someone who would hurt me the moment I opened that door. I stood there, shaking, knife clenched in my hand, tears burning in my eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to disappear. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I didn't want to. The banging continued for what felt like forever, though it was probably only minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence. I didn't move for a long time. I stood there listening, every muscle tense, waiting for the sound to return. Eventually, I retreated to my room and locked the door, sitting on the floor until the sun began to rise. The next day, the truth came out. My family received a phone call from the son of the elderly couple who lived across the street. I barely knew them. I knew they were old, well into their 90s. I later learned the man was a World War II veteran. Their son had been staying with them to help take care of them because they could no longer live entirely on their own. In the middle of the night, his mother had gotten up to use the bathroom. She walked into the living room and saw her son sitting there, eating cereal and watching television. She didn't recognize him. She was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. In her mind, a strange man had broken into her home. She panicked, terrified. She ran out of the house and across the street, desperately trying to get help. She was the one pounding on my door. She was the one screaming. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was scared and confused and alone. When I heard that, something inside me broke. I went from pure terror to overwhelming guilt in seconds. The fear that had consumed me the night before was replaced by a deep, heavy sadness. I kept replaying the moment in my head, hearing her voice, her desperation, and realizing how vulnerable she had been. She needed help, and I couldn't give it to her. I still don't know if opening the door would have been the right thing to do. Logically, I know I was a kid, alone, and scared, and I did what I thought I had to do to survive. But that knowledge doesn't erase the feeling. when it doesn't quiet the what if that still echoes in my mind. That night changed something in me. I still remember the glow of the TV, the weight of the headset, the sound of fists pounding against my door. I remember how quickly a normal night turned into something terrifying and how easily fear can twist reality. Most of all, I remember how close terror and tragedy can be, separated by nothing more than a locked door. Those moments never leave you. They stay with you, seared into your mind, reminding you how fragile safety really is. Have you ever been completely alone at home and suddenly heard something that sounded like a woman screaming while being brutally murdered? Most people would probably say no. I wish I could say no too, but I can't, because I've lived through something like that, and the fear it caused stayed with me for a long time. It happened during a time when I was home alone, in the kind of quiet that only exists late at night or during still evenings. The house was calm, almost too calm. No voices, no movement, just the normal background noises you barely notice when everything feels safe. I was relaxed at first, doing my own thing, not expecting anything unusual. Nothing ever happened in our neighborhood. It was the kind of place where you assumed things were fine. Then the sound started. At first, I didn't even understand what I was hearing. It was distant, but clear enough to make my body tense immediately. It sounded like screaming, not laughing, not shouting, not even arguing. Screaming. The kind of screaming that makes your blood run cold because it doesn't sound playful or dramatic. It sounded desperate, terrified, like someone was in serious danger. My heart started racing almost instantly. I froze, listening harder, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The screams echoed through the night in a way that made it feel unreal, like something out of a horror movie. My brain went straight to the worst possible conclusion. I was convinced I was hearing a woman being attacked, maybe even murdered, right near my home. I remember standing there not knowing what to do. Every instinct told me something was horribly wrong. I debated calling the police, but doubt crept in. What if I was wrong? What if it was something else? The screaming continued, sharp and horrifying, rising and falling, making my stomach twist with fear. Eventually, the truth came out, and it was bizarre in the most unsettling way. My neighbor had foxes living in her backyard. Foxes, apparently, make sounds that are almost indistinguishable from human screams. I learned that the hard way. Knowing the explanation didn't immediately calm me down, though. Even after I understood what it was, the memory of those screams lingered. Once you've heard something like that, your body doesn't just forget it. Logic can explain it, but fear doesn't disappear so easily. That wasn't the only time being home alone turned into something terrifying. Another night, much later, I was trying to sleep. It was around 2 a.m, the kind of hour when the world feels distant and quiet, when everything outside seems paused. I was lying in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, when I heard knocking. At first, I thought I was imagining it. You know how your brain plays tricks on you when you're tired. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably someone closing a door or noise from outside. But the knocking didn't stop. It became louder, more deliberate, firm, insistent. My heart started pounding again, that familiar tight feeling in my chest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Whoever it was, they weren't knocking on my door. The sound was coming from somewhere else in the building, echoing through the walls. Still, it was enough to make me feel uneasy. No one knocks like that at 2 a.m. for a harmless reason. Then I heard voices. At that point, I knew something was very wrong. The voices were tense, sharp, filled with urgency. Soon I realized it was the police. They were trying to get into an apartment in my building. I held my breath, listening through the thin walls, feeling like an unwilling witness to something I never wanted to hear. What unfolded was horrifying. Apparently, the man living in that apartment had been beating his girlfriend. I could hear fragments of what was happening, enough to piece together a nightmare. He had smashed a beer bottle over her head. There was blood. There was screaming. Real screaming this time, not animals in the night. She was begging him not to kill her. Those words echo in my mind even now. I remember sitting there, frozen, unable to move, unable to help, my body filled with fear and anger and helplessness all at once. I wanted the police to break the door down. I wanted them to drag him away in handcuffs. I wanted her to be safe. But that's not how it ended. She didn't press charges. Despite having a head injury, despite everything that had happened, she refused medical help. And medical care is free here. Free. There was no financial reason to refuse it. She chose to stay with him. The police, having no charges to act on, let him be. That was the part that broke something in me. Knowing that someone could survive something so violent, so terrifying, and still stay. Knowing that the system, tied by rules and limitations, could walk away while danger remained behind closed doors. Knowing that I had to keep living in the same building as someone who could do that to another human being. For a long time after that night, I didn't feel safe in my own home. Every noise made me tense. Every raised voice outside made my heart race. I lay awake at night listening, wondering if it would happen again. Wondering if next time she wouldn't survive. There was no justice, no closure, just silence. Eventually, they moved away. That was the only relief I ever got from the situation. I didn't get answers. I didn't get reassurance. I just got distance. At least I no longer had to fear someone being murdered in my building. At least I no longer had to listen through the walls, powerless and scared, hoping the night would pass without tragedy. Even now, years later, those memories stay with me. The screaming foxes taught me that the world can sound terrifying even when no one is actually in danger. The night with the police taught me something much worse, that sometimes the danger is very real, and there's nothing you can do but listen and hope it ends. These are the moments that change how safe you feel in the world. They stay with you. They don't fade easily, and once you've experienced them, you never hear the night the same way again. When I was 12 years old, my mom and I went to visit my aunt and my cousin for a short stay. They lived in a small country town, the kind of place where everything felt quieter and slower compared to the city. Their house sat on a large plot of land, surrounded by open space and trees with no neighbors close enough to see clearly from the windows. It was old, tall, and slightly worn down, a 3-floor house that looked like it had been standing there for generations. Even as a kid, I remember feeling that the house was different, not necessarily scary, but heavy, like it held a lot of history. The floors creaked when you walked, the walls felt thick, and sounds seemed to echo more than they should. Still, it was familiar enough, and I didn't think much of it at the time. That afternoon, I was sitting in the living room playing video games. I had been there for about an hour, fully absorbed, barely aware of anything else happening around me. The TV glow filled the room, and the repetitive sounds of the game drowned out most background noise. My mom and aunt were somewhere else in the house, probably talking, and my cousin had been around earlier, though I wasn't really paying attention to where anyone was. Then, without warning, I heard it. A loud, sharp, clanging sound cut through everything. Clack, clack, clack. It was sudden and harsh, like someone repeatedly striking a wooden plank with a heavy wooden mallet. The sound didn't echo softly or fade away naturally. It was solid and deliberate, and it lasted several seconds before stopping just as abruptly as it started. I paused my game and looked around the room. I'm half expecting someone to be standing there or to hear someone laugh. I waited for a reaction from someone else in the house. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no response at all. After a few seconds, I shrugged it off. Kids are good at that. If something strange happens and nothing immediately follows it, your attention snaps right back to whatever you were doing. I picked up the controller again and dove back into the game, pushing the sound to the back of my mind. A moment later, the TV flickered. The screen dimmed, then brightened again, like the power had dipped for a split second. My game stuttered, almost freezing, then continued. Before I could even fully process that, the sound came back. Clack, clack, clack. This time, my stomach tightened. The sound was unmistakable now, and there was no way to ignore it. It wasn't random. It wasn't subtle. It sounded intentional, rhythmic, and close enough that it felt like it was coming from inside the house. I muted the TV and stood up. My first thought was my cousin. He was 14, and like most kids that age, he liked messing around and pulling small pranks. I figured he might be upstairs, hitting something against the floor or the wall, trying to freak me out. Honestly, the idea was comforting. A prank was better than something unknown. I ran upstairs and went straight to his room. It was empty. His bed was untouched, no movement, no sound. I stood there for a moment, listening. The house felt too quiet. I checked the nearby rooms, opening doors quickly, calling out his name. Nothing. No response, no footsteps, no laughter. Then I heard it again. Clack, clack, clack. My heart started beating faster. The sound didn't feel playful anymore. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt mechanical, repetitive, and wrong. I searched the rest of the upper floor, moving faster now, opening every door, checking corners, closets, anywhere someone could be hiding. There was no one there. The third floor was completely empty. At this point, fear was creeping in. That uncomfortable feeling in your chest when your brain starts asking questions it doesn't want answers to. Where was everyone? Why hadn't anyone responded? And what was making that sound? My thoughts turned to the unfinished basement. I didn't like the basement. It was dark, cold, and smelled like dust and old wood. The stairs leading down felt steeper than they should have, and the light barely reached the bottom. Still, I told myself that the sound had to be coming from there. It was the only place left. I forced myself to go down. Every step felt heavier than the last. I flicked on the light and scanned the space quickly. Old boxes, tools, nothing out of place. No movement, no explanation. The basement was just as empty as the rest of the house. That was the moment the fear fully hit. I was alone. Completely alone in that big old house. I didn't walk, I ran. I bolted up the stairs, through the living room, and straight out the front door. The fresh air hit me like a shock as I sprinted toward the garden, where I finally spotted my mom and aunt. They were outside, relaxed, talking, completely unaware that anything strange had happened. I was breathless when I reached them. I asked if they had heard the noise, the clanging, the power flicker, anything at all. They looked confused. Well, they told me they had been in the garden the entire time, catching up, and hadn't heard a thing. Not a sound. Not even the power flickering. I asked about my cousin. My aunt casually told me that he had left over an hour earlier to walk into town. The words hit me hard. That meant I had been alone in the house the entire time. No cousin, no prank, no one upstairs or in the basement. Just me, in that old 3-story house, listening to a sound with no clear source. To this day, I still don't know what caused it. I don't know what made that clacking noise. I don't know why the power flickered at the exact same time. There was never an explanation. No loose boards, no machinery, no animals that anyone could find. All I know is how it felt. That sudden shift from boredom to fear. The realization that I wasn't just imagining things. The knowledge that I was alone when it happened. Even now, years later, the memory still makes my skin crawl. It's one of those experiences that never fully leaves you, the kind that reminds you how strange and unsettling familiar places can become in an instant. Sometimes not knowing the answer is worse than any explanation you could come up with. I used to work maintenance at a collection of historic properties, the kind of job that sounded peaceful when you described it to people. Most of the sites were preserved buildings, old homes frozen in time, surrounded by land that was kept as untouched as possible. On paper, it was a dream job. In reality, it meant long hours alone in places that still carried the weight of the people who had lived there. Some buildings felt empty. Others felt like they were only pretending to be. One of the places I worked at regularly was a historic house museum tucked deep inside a wooded landmark site. The visitor center sat near the main road, modern and functional, with offices, restrooms, and a small gift shop. The house itself was about half a mile away, up a narrow dirt road that curved through thick trees. When leaves were on the branches, or you could barely see the sky. Even during the day, the road felt dim and enclosed, like it led somewhere separate from the rest of the world. The house was beautiful in a worn, quiet way. It had been preserved carefully, but you could still feel its age in the floors and walls. The wood creaked constantly, even when no one was moving. The windows were tall and thin, letting in light that always seemed softer than it should be. When the site was open to the public, the place felt lively. Footsteps echoed, voices bounced off the walls, and the rooms filled with motion. But when it was closed, especially in winter, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Sometimes I worked there with a crew, but a lot of the time I was alone. It didn't bother me at first. I liked the solitude. I could focus on my tasks without distraction. I'd bring a radio, let music fill the empty rooms, and move from project to project. But there were days when the silence pressed in harder than usual. One winter afternoon stands out more than any other. The weather was miserable. Thick clouds hung low over the trees, blocking what little sunlight winter had to offer. Everything looked grey and flat. The air was damp and cold enough that it crept through my gloves and into my fingers. The dirt road was muddy, my boots sinking slightly with each step as I carried my tools up toward the house. Even the woods were quiet. No birds, no wind, just a heavy stillness that made every sound I made feel too loud. I was scheduled to do exterior electrical work that day. Before I touched anything, I had to shut off the circuit to the entire property. That was standard procedure, no shortcuts. I went inside the house, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. The air inside was colder than outside, trapped and stale. My breath fogged faintly in front of me as I walked to the panel. I flipped the main circuit off. The house settled into silence. Even the faint hum of electricity disappeared. I tested the lines to be sure. Nothing. Dead. Exactly how it should be. I double-checked because I always double-checked. Working with electricity in an old building is not something you gamble with. Satisfied, I locked the doors behind me and headed back outside with my ladder. For the next hour, I focused on the job. Climb, adjust, measure, step down, move the ladder, repeat. The cold made everything slower. My hands ached inside my gloves, and my breath came out in steady, white clouds. The house loomed behind me, quiet and dark, every window reflecting the grey sky. It felt abandoned in a way that was almost peaceful. When I finally climbed down to reposition the ladder, I decided to walk around the perimeter and check my progress from a distance. My boots crunched softly over frozen leaves as I rounded the corner. I wasn't thinking about anything strange. My mind was on the work, on how much longer it would take, on getting back to the warmth of the visitor center when I finished. That's when I saw it. Through one of the front windows, A light was on. I stopped walking. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The bulb glowed a steady, unmistakable yellow inside the dark house. It wasn't a flicker or a reflection. It was fully on, casting light across the interior wall. I stared at it, waiting for it to go out, unexpecting my eyes to correct themselves. It didn't. A cold sensation slid down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I missed a circuit. Maybe there was a backup line I didn't know about. Old buildings have weird wiring. That thought anchored me just enough to keep panic from taking over immediately. Still, my heart had started to pound. I stepped closer to the window, boots sinking into the mud. The light remained steady. The room it lit up was one I had walked through 100 times. I knew exactly which fixture it was. I also knew with absolute certainty that the power was off. I had tested it myself. My first instinct was that someone was inside. That thought hit harder than the electrical impossibility. The house was locked. I had locked it. No one was supposed to be there. The idea of a stranger inside a dark, isolated building half a mile from help made my stomach tighten. I stepped back from the window and grabbed my walkie-talkie with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. I called the visitor center and asked who was on site. Only one co-worker answered. He sounded relaxed, bored even. I asked if anyone had left the building. He said no. I asked if anyone had keys to the house. He confirmed every set was accounted for and sitting where it should be. No one had gone up the dirt road. No one had been near the property. As he talked, I kept my eyes on that glowing window. The calm tone in his voice made the situation feel more unreal. I explained what I was seeing. There was a long pause on the line. He tried to joke about it, but the laugh came out thin. We both knew I had killed the power. We both knew what that meant. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. It became physical. My chest felt tight. The woods around me suddenly seemed deeper, darker. Every tree looked like it was leaning in. I imagined the locked doors, the empty rooms, the single light burning where it shouldn't be. My mind ran through scenarios and rejected all of them. None of them made sense. I didn't go back inside. I wish I could say I stayed calm and investigated, but the truth is, I turned and ran. I left my tools where they were and sprinted up that dirt road, boots slipping in the mud. My breath tore in and out of my lungs, loud in my ears. The half-mile felt twice as long as usual. Every step I expected to hear something behind me, footsteps or a door slamming or something worse. When I burst into the visitor center, my co-worker took one look at my face and stopped joking. I must have looked shaken because he grabbed his jacket without arguing. I told him he was coming back with me. There was no way I was returning to that house alone. The walk back felt different with two people, but the fear didn't disappear. It just settled into a tense silence between us. The woods were still too quiet. The house came into view slowly through the trees, dark and still. The window was black. The light was off. We approached carefully, neither of us speaking. I unlocked the door with hands that still weren't completely steady. The air inside felt the same as before, cold and stale. We walked straight to the room where I had seen the light. The fixture hung from the ceiling, dark and harmless. My co-worker reached up and touched the bulb. He jerked his hand back and swore. It was warm, not faintly warm, recently on warm, the kind of warmth that only comes from current running through a filament. We both stared at it like it might explain itself. I walked to the panel and checked the circuit again. Still off. Dead. The silence in that room felt enormous. The bulb hung there, cooling slowly, proof that something impossible had just happened. My co-worker tried to come up with explanations, his voice quieter now. Faulty wiring, residual current. some freak electrical anomaly. Each idea sounded weaker than the last. All the doors were still locked. The windows were sealed. There was no sign anyone had entered. No footprints, no disturbed dust, nothing. Just a warm bulb in a powerless house. We didn't stay long after that. We shut the place up and walked back to the visitor center without saying much. The woods felt heavier on the return trip. I kept glancing back at the house through the trees, half expecting to see that light flare on again. It never did. On paper, I know there has to be an explanation. Electricity follows rules. Circuits don't just come alive on their own. But I also know what I saw. I know the certainty of testing that panel. I know the glow in that window and the warmth of that bulb. Those details are locked into my memory with a clarity that hasn't faded. I worked at that site after that day. I walked through that house many more times. Nothing like it ever happened again. The building went back to being just an old structure with creaky floors and cold rooms. But something had changed for me. I was never completely comfortable there after that. Every time I shut off a circuit, I thought about that light. Every time I walked those empty rooms alone, I felt a faint echo of that afternoon pressing at the edges of my mind. Historic places are supposed to preserve the past in a safe, controlled way. That day reminded me that old spaces can still surprise you in ways you're not prepared for. Even now, years later, I can picture that window glowing against the gray winter sky. A single light burning where no light should exist. It's a simple image, but it still gives me a chill. Some memories don't need movement or noise to be frightening. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet house and a light that refuses to obey the rules. A few years ago, when I was still in high school, I ended up home alone for an entire weekend. My parents had gone out of town, and my sister was staying with relatives, so the house was completely mine. At first it felt like freedom. No rules, no noise, no one asking where I was going. But once the excitement faded, the emptiness of the place started to feel heavier than I expected. Our house wasn't huge, but when you're the only person inside it, every creak and hum seems louder. One afternoon after school, I was driving back home like I always did. It was a normal day, nothing special about it. The sky was pale and cloudy, the kind of flat gray that makes everything look dull. I remember feeling tired and just wanting to get inside, drop my backpack and zone out for a while. As I turned onto my street and slowed down in front of the house, my eyes automatically went to the windows, a habit I didn't even realize I had. That's when I saw her. In my sister's bedroom window, standing close to the glass, was the shape of an old woman dressed in white. She looked thin and still, like she had been there for a long time, just staring out. Her clothes were loose and pale, almost glowing against the darker room behind her. For a split second, our eyes seemed to meet, even though I couldn't make out her face clearly. The image hit me like a cold splash of water. I blinked hard and looked again. The window was empty. I slowed the car almost to a stop, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. My brain immediately tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe a curtain shifted and my mind filled in the rest. I told myself I was being stupid. There was no way an old woman was standing in my sister's room. The doors were locked. No one else had keys. Still, a thin thread of unease followed me as I parked and got out of the car. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. The yard was quiet. No movement in the windows. No sign that anything was wrong. I stood there for a moment, listening. The neighborhood was calm, just distant traffic and a dog barking somewhere down the street. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, half expecting to hear footsteps or voices. Instead, I was greeted by the usual silence. The air inside felt stale, like a house that had been closed up all day. I set my backpack down and walked straight to my sister's room, and I didn't want to give myself time to imagine things. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Her room was exactly how she left it. The bed was unmade, clothes draped over a chair, posters crooked on the wall. Afternoon light spilled through the window, showing dust floating lazily in the air. There was no one there. I checked behind the door, inside the closet, even under the bed, feeling a little ridiculous as I did it. Every corner was empty. I stood in the middle of the room and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The tension drained out of me, replaced by embarrassment. I laughed quietly at myself. My imagination had gotten the better of me. I told myself that was the end of it. Just a weird visual trick on a tired afternoon. For the rest of the evening I tried to forget about it. I made food, watched TV, or scrolled on my phone. The house felt normal again. Every now and then I'd think about the figure in the window, but the memory already felt fuzzy, like a dream you can't fully hold on to. By the time it got dark, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Night settled over the house in that heavy way it does when you're alone. Every room felt deeper, the shadows thicker. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and turned on a few extra lights just because I could. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was more aware of the silence than usual. It pressed in from all sides. I was lying on the couch sometime after midnight, half watching a movie, when my phone rang. The sudden sound made me jump. My heart kicked hard in my chest as I grabbed it. The screen showed my neighbor's name. She was an older woman who lived a few houses down, a friendly but not someone who called me often. I answered, expecting something casual. Instead, I was hit with panic. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her at first. She kept asking if I was home, if I was safe. I sat up straight, confusion replacing the leftover calm from the movie. I told her yes, I was home, and asked what was wrong. There was a long, shaky breath on the other end. She said there was an old woman in my sister's room. The words didn't land right away. My brain rejected them, like they didn't fit into reality. I asked her to repeat herself. She did, faster this time, more urgent. She said she could see into the window from her house, and there was a woman pacing back and forth inside the room. Back and forth, back and forth. She sounded terrified, and like she was watching something she couldn't explain. Every hair on my arms stood up. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. From where I sat, I couldn't see my sister's door. The house was silent, too silent. My neighbor kept talking, her voice rising, asking if I had someone over, asking if she should call the police. I couldn't answer right away. My mouth had gone dry. The image from earlier that afternoon slammed back into my mind. The figure in white at the window. I told her to stay on the phone. Standing up felt like moving through thick mud. Each step toward the hallway was heavy. My heart was pounding so hard it made my ears ring. I didn't want to walk down that hall. Every instinct told me to stay where I was, to lock the door and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the idea of someone inside the house, a real person, pushed me forward. The hallway was dark, except for a thin strip of light from the living room behind me. The air felt colder there. I could hear my own breathing and the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. My neighbor whispered that the woman was still moving, still pacing. Her voice sounded far away, like it was coming through water. I reached my sister's door and stopped. The handle was inches from my hand. I stood there listening, hoping to hear footsteps or movement that would confirm this was real. There was nothing. Just silence pressing against my ears. My hand trembled as I reached out and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting everything in pale blue. The bed, the chair, the posters are all exactly where they had been earlier. No woman, no movement. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes scanning every corner. The closet door was closed. I opened it with a quick pull. Empty. I told my neighbor there was no one there. She swore she had just seen the woman seconds before. She described her again in detail. The white clothes, the slow pacing. Her fear was real. I could hear it in every word. This wasn't a prank or a misunderstanding. She believed what she saw with her whole body. I walked to the window and looked out toward her house. Her porch light was on, and I could see her silhouette standing there, phone pressed to her ear. We stared at each other across the dark yard. The distance between us felt enormous. I checked every room in the house after that. Closets, bathrooms, even the garage. Every space was empty. The doors were still locked. The windows were closed. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. Logically, it made no sense. And yet the fear hung in the air, thick and undeniable. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the lights on and sat in the living room, listening to every tiny sound. The house felt different now, like it was holding a secret. Every shadow in the hallway looked like it might move if I stared too long. My mind replayed the image of the woman over and over, filling in details I wasn't even sure I had seen. Morning came slowly, grey light creeping through the windows. The house looked normal again, almost innocent. I walked back into my sister's room in daylight, hoping the fear would vanish under the sun. It helped a little, but not completely. The memory was still there, sharp and cold. When my family came back, I told them what happened. They tried to laugh it off, offering simple explanations. A reflection, a misunderstanding, someone walking outside at just the right angle. I wanted to believe them. I still do. But there's a part of me that remembers my neighbor's voice shaking on the phone, remembers the certainty in her fear. I never saw the woman again. The weekends after that passed normally. The house returned to being just a house. But every now and then, when I walk past my sister's old room, I feel a small chill, like stepping through a patch of cold air. I always glance at the window without meaning to, half expecting to see that pale figure standing there again. Nothing is ever there, and somehow that almost makes it worse. Back in high school, I grew up in a part of rural Iowa where everybody knew everyone else's business, and most people kept an eye on each other without even being asked. It was just how things worked. If someone left town, neighbors watched the property. If someone got sick, casseroles showed up at the door. It wasn't unusual, so when an elderly neighbor of ours moved into a nursing home, my dad and another man down the road sort of unofficially took responsibility for her house. Her name was Ms. Crum, and her place sat a little off the main road, surrounded by open fields and a thin line of trees. It wasn't abandoned exactly, but it had that empty house feeling. The grass still got cut. The driveway stayed clear, but no lights came on at night, no car pulled in, no curtains moved. In the countryside, empty buildings have a way of attracting attention, especially from bored teenagers looking for somewhere private to hang out. A vacant farmhouse is basically an invitation for a party spot if the wrong people notice it. That was the main reason my dad kept watch. He didn't want kids breaking in, trashing the place, or setting something on fire. He respected Ms. Crum, and in a small town, that kind of loyalty runs deep. He'd drive by every so often, check the doors, make sure everything looked normal. The other neighbor did the same. Between the two of them, the house stayed untouched. One night, a few friends and I were out driving around because there was nothing else to do. That was a big part of our social life back then. You'd pile into someone's car, pick up a couple more people, and just roam the back roads talking about nothing. We had 2 girls with us, music playing low, windows cracked open to the cool night air. The roads were empty except for the occasional farmhouse light glowing in the distance. We weren't headed anywhere in particular when we turned onto the stretch that passed Ms. Crum's house. It wasn't even a conscious decision. It was just part of the loop everyone drove when they were killing time. As we came up the road, the house appeared ahead of us, a dark shape against an even darker sky. Then someone in the car said, "Wait, what's that?" We all looked. There was a light on in the attic. Not only that, but through the thin blinds covering the window, you could see the silhouette of a person moving. It was unmistakable. A human shape crossed the window slowly, shoulders and head outlined against the yellow glow. For a moment, nobody said anything. The car just kept rolling forward, engine humming, while our brains tried to catch up to what we were seeing. "That's not right," I said, already reaching for my phone. Everyone in the car was talking at once. One of the girls swore. My friend leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting like that would somehow make it less real. The silhouette moved again, a dark figure pacing behind the blinds. It wasn't a flicker or a shadow from outside. It was inside the attic. I called my dad immediately. My voice was shaking more than I expected. I told him I thought someone was in Ms. Crumb's house, that the attic light was on, and we could see a person walking around. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said it was impossible. The power to the house had been shut off, completely off. There was no electricity running to it. I turned the phone toward the others and told them to talk. One by one, they confirmed what we were seeing, all of us talking over each other. 4 separate people describing the same thing. I pointed the car toward the driveway and slowed enough that we could stare straight at the window. The figure was still there, moving calmly back and forth like it had all the time in the world. My dad's tone changed. He told us to stay in the car and keep our distance. He was on his way, and he was calling the other neighbor too. The minutes after that felt stretched and heavy. We parked a little way down the road, headlights off, watching the house like it might suddenly explode. The attic window glowed steadily. Every time the silhouette passed in front of it, my stomach tightened. No one joked. No one laughed. The mood inside the car had flipped completely. We were scared in that quiet, focused way where nobody wants to say the wrong thing and make it worse. The fields around us were pitch black. The house stood alone in the darkness, that single lit window making it look awake. Eventually we saw headlights coming fast down the road. My dad's truck and the other neighbor's vehicle pulled up almost at the same time. They got out and stood by the road, both of them looking up at the attic. Even from where we were sitting, I could see their posture change. They weren't brushing it off anymore. They were staring at the same impossible light. And then, just as they started walking toward the house, the attic went dark. The light didn't flicker, it didn't dim. It simply shut off, like someone had flipped a switch. The window turned black, blending back into the rest of the house. The sudden absence of that glow made the place look dead again, like it had never been lit at all. My dad and the neighbor hurried up the driveway. We stayed in the car, watching their flashlights bounce across the porch and windows. The night felt colder without that light. Every second dragged. I kept expecting the attic to flare back on, or a figure to appear in one of the downstairs windows. After a while, they came back down. Their faces were tight, serious. My dad told us to go home. It was late, and we needed to take the girls back. His voice had that tone that meant, "Don't argue." We asked what they found, but he just shook his head and repeated himself, "Go home." As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The house was completely dark. No movement, no glow, and nothing to suggest anyone had ever been inside. It sat there quietly under the stars, surrounded by empty fields. Later I learned they had checked the power line running to the house. It was off, exactly like my dad said. No electricity, no hidden generator, no sign of forced entry. All the doors and windows were still locked from the inside. There was no evidence that anyone had been there at all. What bothered me most wasn't just that we saw a light. It was that all of us saw the same thing, the same silhouette, the same pacing movement. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of headlights. We were parked at an angle where nothing from the road could have cast a human-shaped shadow in that attic window, and my dad and the neighbor arrived in time to see the light for themselves. It wasn't just a story we told later and convinced ourselves was real. They witnessed it too. I never did hear a final explanation. Maybe my dad had one and chose not to share it. Maybe he didn't. In small towns, sometimes people let strange things sit without digging too hard. Life goes on either way. Ms. Crumb's house eventually changed hands, and a new family moved in years later. The attic window just became another window again. But every time I drive past that stretch of road when I visit home, I still glance toward the house. In daylight it looks harmless, almost cozy. At night, though, when the fields are dark and the sky is wide, I can't help remembering that glowing attic and the shape moving calmly behind the blinds in a house that had no power. The memory sticks with me in a way I can't quite shake. It's one of those moments that sits outside the neat explanations we like to rely on. A small tear in the fabric of what's supposed to be possible. And once you've seen something like that, even for a few seconds, it changes how you look at quiet houses in the dark. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.